Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Laurie Davis, host of the Today Show here on the Disability Channel. Thank you for joining us for Tuesday. Exciting news today. We're streaming live on, of course, my Facebook page, my YouTube channel, Laurie Davis Show Host, and we've just added the TDC YouTube channel. So we're streaming live on TDC YouTube as well today. And some of our shows go south of the border to your home television. I'm just really happy to be back. I cannot believe it's Tuesday already. And joined again today by Dr. Ramin Modiri, our finance guy. So welcome to the show, Ramin.
Good morning. It's wonderful to be back. And what a difference a week makes. Last week, we were in 104-degree heat with the fire in the backyard. And this week, it's right now, it's in the 60s. And at least in our end, the fire has been contained, and unfortunately, the inland still there are some challenges, but we are fine. And again, it's how our lives can change within a week. Our priorities can change. So here we are. Thankfully, all is good.
So is that cool down helping the fires at all?
Absolutely. We have some moist, the cool down. We had some rain, actually, believe it or not, a couple of days ago, middle of the night. So it's all good. So thank God.
Great. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, what do you have in store for us today? You always have something really cool and unique and intriguing. So what's up today?
All right. So, well, we have such a good supporters and friends of the show. And last week, one of our good friends, who's a great veteran from New Brunswick, Mark, he had such a wonderful words to say about the show, but also suggested, with all the things going around the world, how does the politics affect the markets and investing and investments? And I thought, well, that's a great subject. And I know he's, I love history. So I thought, well, let's have a journey and look at how the politics, and in our situation, what I'm going to do is more on the political events rather than the policies, how they affect us. So the policies can be another show. That's when we talk about policies. Is mostly we look at the government and the ruling governments and the elections, how they affect the economies of those nations, and especially if you go to Latin America, a lot of times that really affects it. So of course we have United States election we hear in 50 days or so. Actually, today's Tuesday, so before you know it, first week of November, here we are. So it's very close. So we will discuss that another day, another time. But for now, we're gonna look at how the events happen. And what timely is that? That just a few days ago, there was an attempted assassination of one of our candidates, ex-President Trump. So what I thought is, let's look at what happens when there's a crisis, or again, a political event or geopolitical event happens, and how do the markets react? Do they overreact or they underreact? How long does it take? And then what do we do when these things happen? What is our defense mechanism as far as our investments? So can we be prepared? Can we do something about it? So will be the topic and subject of today's show. So before we do that, the reason I think it's important to pay attention to these things is because history does matter. One of the things, you go back, over 5,000 years, we look at the civilizations. They have come and gone, and we've had great empires, which some of them not even with us any longer. What hasn't changed is the human greed and hunger for power and the fear. So as human beings, we still have the same instincts and desires, despite all the technologies and um, uh, all the advancements. We still are the same. Our alligator brain, I call, which is our oldest part of our brain, 700 million years. It is still active. So you compare some of the leaders today, they behave exactly what the empires and all the some of the uh, leaders of the world did, and they have fallen. You know, they have achieved things, but they have also lost things. So saying that, I let's start with this. You know, again, we had attempted assassination. So
Hmm.
we had on I don't know if some of our audience are old enough to remember, on March 30th, 1981, we had attempted assassination on President Reagan.
I remember that.
So, you know, here is the leader of the free world. And of course, we have the Cold War. And, you know, the markets dropped 0.3%, so under 1%. And within 2 days, they were back to their normal activities. And basically, the markets looked at it, and especially while he survived it, so they did not overreact. And you will see a common theme in all the events that I'm going to talk about. So it's going to be a lot of numbers and statistics. You will see there's a kind of common theme, which I will mention at the end. One of the biggest things have been obviously, which shook the world, was assassination of President Kennedy. And with that, it was November 22nd, 1963. And that was, again, it was something, it was really um, sudden. Nobody expected that. Of course, we have the Bay of Pigs and all that. So the markets did drop 2.6%, which was pretty big. And guess what? A day later, back up,
Whoa.
normal. Who would think? I mean, here, this new president with all the goals, and of course we have this big tension. He he was assassinated, and yet the markets behaved not what we would think about. One of the latest ones are as far as assassination. It was in December, well, I mean January 3rd of 2020, and an Iranian general was killed in Iraq on an airstrike. Of course, we get worried anything happens in the Middle East. And what happens is in the Middle East, everything so interconnected, the world pays attention. So, well, with that, his assassination, well, when he was killed, the markets dropped 0.7%, and within 5 days, they were in the positive. So you can see the common theme that the markets do not really, if they overreact in the beginning, they don't really continue with that. And it's very similar to, and I might have used this example in the past, when your parents, the child cries, you get to know that crying voice. So the next time when they're crying, you know what to do and you don't panic. When you're a new parent, we panic and all that. Or the same thing over the overreaction of any event. We see accidents first time and then we keep. So after a while, we are kind of prepared to see how to react because you've had experiences with that. So it's interesting that the markets they're like having children, so they know. The big thing is when the fundamentally things change. And that's the difference. When economically the fundamentals have changed within the nation or globally. I mean, a good example is like pandemics when it start regionally and then it spread. Initially, everybody discounted it, and then it started, and then it became economic disaster rather than a health disaster. So when they have legs, things do happen. So, uh, but other than that, again, when we had like, I remember I was trading a like London subway bombing. It was in 2005, right after 4th of July here, July 5th, it happened. I remember I traded that because what happened, the markets completely dropped. And that was a good time because you know the history. That was actually a good time to buy it. And it just immediately came back and it was actually down nothing by the next day. So basically, these are the things that we learn from the history. So, what I'm going to take you, I'm going to look at some of the biggest events that have happened and how we have actually that that the effects on the economy and the markets. So, one of the important things over the years, a lot of nations around the globe actually they use geopolitical events as an excuse. So we go back after World War One, when we look at the rise of Nazis, the social democrats in Germany, for instance, it was more on the economic side of things because so much pressure, there was hyperinflation in Germany, and that was the attraction. So basically, when you think about Hitler, he was no one really special. He had a command of the language in some ways, but also the timing was right. His competitors were, they weren't even thinking about him. They were competing against each other. So they got rid of each other. And here it was the rise of Hitler. And he used that economic pressure that Germany was under as excuse. And that's how really he unified in a way Germany. And basically World War II was more of a economic more than just anything else to really save the economy. And as a matter of fact, when we think about Great Depression in the United States, a lot of people will give credit to President Roosevelt with his big deal policies. But really, when you look at it, the markets really didn't revive till after the World War II and the government intervention. And the government, it was all about the government producing economic activity. And after World War II, when obviously when we had our soldiers coming home in the United States and Canada, they wanted to have families, they wanted to build new life. They really revived the economy. There was a consumerism, creating things for them, baby food, frozen food, cars, everything revived around that time. And that's when 1950s became a great decade. It was a consequence of, again, end of the World War II. So you see how much economy plays a role. So a lot of nations around the globe, and I can use many, including like Iran, in order to keep their population occupied, they use war as an excuse. So when there is a lot of pressure, political, I mean, and not just political, economic pressure, that's when happens that they create something out of nothing. And when Iraq invaded Iran, for instance, in 1980, Saddam thought, oh, Iran is going through the revolution. They're going to be defeated because there's so many factions. But the nationalism came into the picture. And then in Iran, they were drafting 16-year-olds to go and fight. And basically that lasted 8 years and almost 1.5 million people died. But that kept both governments in power because that's all people thought about. If you're hungry, well, it's the war's fault. If we have inflation, it's the war's fault. No jobs,
Right.
it's the war's fault. And nationalism comes into the picture. So unfortunately, it happens a lot, and especially in the Middle East. So let's look at some of the biggest bear markets or the events that have affected the stock market, especially. And I'll start. So if you want to write them, or at least give you some examples how they affected immediately. So on May 10th, 1940, there was an invasion of France. And within a month, the markets dropped 25.8%. Within 3 months, they were still down 14.5%. And within 12 months, they were down almost 21%. And that translated, we call it a bear market. So anytime you're over 20% down, that's, you talk about bulls and bears, it was a bear market. The second biggest event was, which really was a catalyst for the United States to get involved, was December 7th, in 1941, when the Pearl Harbor happened. And now United States is involved. And right after that, and that was shocking, within a month, the markets were down 4.1%. Within 3 months, they were down 12%. But after 12 months, they were down only 0.9%. So things started moving. And as I mentioned, it was a stimulation. Then we go to like 1950, and June 25th, we have Korean War. And Korean War happened. Now, it's interesting that because we are coming right off of World War II, immediately there was this worry with the communism, the Cold War starting. So the markets reacted immediately. They were down 4.6%. Would you believe in 12 months after, they were actually up 17.6%, which is a pretty good return. So, and as I mentioned, at the end, we will tie the knots. Then we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, which happened, right before President assassination, October 14 to 28, 1962. And the markets really didn't react because it was contained, and they were up 5.6% within a month. And 12 months later, up 27%. Another event, I'm going chronologically, it happened the 6 Day Middle East War. And, of course, we're having a lot of Middle East on June 5th, 1967. That was it. And it continued till October. And basically, that one, the markets didn't even go down. They were up, and then they were up 11% in 12 months. Coming to 1986, I don't know if you recall, the U.S. Reagan ordered and the U.S. bombed Libya, and there was Gaddafi there. And with the bombardment, the market did react because they were worried because of the terrorism. They dropped 1%. 12 months later, up 20%. So do you see there's a commonality here? It is not really contained locally, and it's not spreading. The markets really don't overreact. And then, but on the other hand, we had Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. Now we have, this is 1990, it's August. Remember, we have the oil situation, and the markets immediately reacted. They were down 9%, didn't know what Saddam is going to do, how Saudi Arabia is going to react. But again, 12 months later, markets up 9%. And then following that, a year later, we have the Operation Desert Storm in Iraq. Actually, the markets applauded that. They thought that was great because they could contain the crisis. Within a month, markets up 17%. A year later, they're up 32.5%. So because now there was a mini crisis, and the markets, one of the things you have to remember, the markets don't mind the bad news. They just do not like uncertainty. So when we talk about policy or the politics, they want to know who they're dealing with and what situation. As long as that's clear, they can prepare for that. When there's that there's not clarity, then they overreact. And that's what you can see again with the launch of this Operation Desert Storm. And it happened quickly. Basically, they just love that because there was a closure on that. Of course, everyone remembers 9/11. We just had it, last week, and it was a shock. The markets did close, but it was also combined with the we had the bubble, internet, the tech bubble in the United States. The interest rates started rising, recession starting, and then after that, it really affected the financial markets. And within 12 months after 9/11, the markets were down 16.8%, and they continued going down. The last but not least would say this was a big event. The Operation Iraqi Freedom is called, and that's when the United States invaded Iraq on March 20th. And the markets, they actually applauded that. The first month they were down 2.2%. 12 months later, they're up 27%. So these are some of the events. I will continue as far as um, the depth of it. I don't know if you like to make it, take a little break. It's and,
We can do that.
right. Okay.
You bet. Well, that's very interesting. And I think that's really good information to have because, like you said, we would all assume because of the tragedy or the trauma or whatever was going on that that would be a negative. But what I'm hearing, if it is, it's not for very long. Am I correct?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's the kind.
Perfect. All right. We'll be right back after this little break. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dr. Laurie Davis here with Dr. Ramin Modiri today, featuring Money Matters on Tuesday. It's all about finance and what's going on out there, and we couldn't have a better person to share that with us. So back over to you. We've been talking about how events, historical events, have impacted the markets and how to look at that from our perspective. So thank you so much for that. That's very valuable. Over to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Again, when I talk about markets, we are using S&P 500, which is the top 500 companies, the index of the top 500 companies in the United States, which is the most followed index in the world. So that's why I'm not making it regional. So I'm looking at the big picture. So if you talk to any fund manager, let's say whether it's in Hong Kong or where they're sitting in London, they always watch US markets. And that's what we're using as our criteria here. So the bottom line, that's what the conclusion we can have is really we cannot overreact when the events happen. So if you're a long-term investor, perhaps you want to staying in your investments or at least have enough diversification. As we will close our conversation, what can we do? What happens to other, as far as when these events happen, and do we panic or do we have other avenues to take? So what I'm going to do this time is, let's say the events were really drastic and it did take a big chunk of the markets down. How long does it take to recover? How long you have to be patient? So again, there's a lot of statistics, so just bear with me, because then again, you see, except like maybe few events, the markets, like you mentioned, they come back. As a matter of fact, I just give you the history is like within 42 days or 30 trading days, the market back and recovered in average with all the geopolitical events that have happened around the globe. So let's take a little journey here. I give you some of the events and how long did it take to break even. So, and again, we will have a conclusion at the end. So this attack of Pearl Harbor was shocking. I mean, not just personally, but the markets did not really expect that. So in 1941, when it happened, the markets did drop almost 20%, 19.8% to be exact. And it took the market 307 days to break even. So even if you did not do anything and you lost, let's say 20%, well, if you have sat tight, after less than a year, you would have had your money back. So It's the patience. The second biggest event that affected the markets was in 1990 when Iraq invaded Kuwait. The market actually dropped with that 1990 16.9%. But after that, after 189 days, which is almost a little over half a year, they broke even. Again, under a year, you got your money back. North Korea invaded South Korea in 1950. For the year, as I mentioned, the markets dropped 12.9%. But after that, when we call it trough, when we went down and markets decided to uh, move back up, it took only 82 days to recoup that 12.9%. And then we have I don't know if you recall, the Munich Olympics in 1972 when the athletes were killed, the Israeli athletes. Well, the markets dropped in 94.3%, and within 57 days, they were back up and break even. Then we have the Saudi Aramco drone strike in 2019. That shook the markets up, dropped 4%. 41 days later, they are back up. And I mentioned about United States, the terrorist attack on 2001. They dropped 11.6%, almost 12%. Believe it or not, within 31 days after the market moved back, within that, they actually broke even. And this goes on and on. I mean, we have the Cuban missiles crisis. We have, how about Boston Marathon bombing in 2013? I don't know if you recall that. In Boston,
Mm-hmm.
dropped 3%. 15 days later, break even. And we had Hungarian uprising, market dropped 0.8%. 4 days later. So, and then in 2021, the U.S. pulls out of Afghanistan. The market flat. Nothing happened. Really, they didn't care. So, and then
Oh,
I
wow.
mentioned about President Kennedy's assassination. We dropped 2.8%. 1 day later, we are good. So, in average, believe it or not, after all these events that we get nervous, 6 months later, the markets are up 5%. They're up 5%. For the year, in average, after every event, the market's up 9%. So they have initial, within first month, they have initial down, but then 6 months, a year later, they're up. So whether we look at Cuban Missile Crisis, President Nixon impeachment is only an exception, and that happened in 1974. And you will see again the common reason for that. It was not just about the impeachment itself, it was other forces coming together, the inflationary forces. We had the OPEC squeeze and a lot of other things were catalysts. We had we call it Nifty 50 stock market overblown. I mean, the stock market had really become expensive. So with that impeachment, the market actually did not recover. They actually went down. We had a bear market. So within 12 months, we still were down 16%. That's the only exception. Other than that, the markets really, they look at other factors rather than just the event itself. How does that affect other things? Um, we had Iranian hostage crisis in 1979. Again, the markets were shaken up. 12 months later, up 26%. Soviet Union, the same year, 1979, invaded Afghanistan. Market dropped 5%. 6 months later, up 6%, and up 26% a year later. And the first Ukraine conflict in 2014, market dropped 8%. I mean, 1%, then they're up 8% and 12%. So what you can see is, again, there's a lot of different things that happen, but the sell-offs in average are limited about 6.2%. So if you can handle that, if you can, it's okay to lose an average. And knowing that within 30 trading days or within, 43 days, you get your money back, then we don't want to overreact. So uh, the idea is we want to look at the other, as I mentioned, factors rather than just purely on what event has happened. Now, for instance, we look at the Russia invasion of Ukraine, and when it happened in February of 2022, the markets obviously reacted. The commodities, when looking at the price of food, but when the markets did go down, it was not mainly right after. It was not the main factor, believe it or not, although it affected the energy prices in Europe, in Western Europe specifically. United States, our inflation had grown, so the central bank decided to increase the rate. So the markets paid attention to the increase of rate, how they affect us, rather than just purely, oh, here it is, Russia has invaded Ukraine. We're going to sanction them. We're going to do this. So basically, after every single crisis, the markets have had uh, uh, recoveries. The only, again, recovery I mentioned about 1974 was the oil crisis and the bear market. So going back, for instance, when we had the Ukraine um, invasion by Russia, yes, the markets did drop, and we look at like 50 days prior and 50 days after. We see every crisis 50 days after we are back, except again with the Russian invasion because there was other factors involved that did not uh, really help the situation. So I'm talking too much. How about
No,
any any
I'm
any
taking notes.
any suggestions or anything? Any thoughts that you have so far?
Well, the only thing I want to say, we're getting some feedback on our Facebook page right now, and sometimes those comments don't come up here for us, but
Oh,
just people commenting on the quality of education that you provide every Tuesday and how much you work. I'm going to say this from my perspective. When we start really listening to what you have to say, one has to understand how much work went on behind the scenes to gather and collect that information. And that's where the value of our show comes in, because our shows are really content rich. We're not just talking smoke out our butt. It's stuff that we know and things that we've worked with and things that you've researched. And so I'm trusting that our viewers value the quality of our content, because one of the things I do know about our shows, they are content rich. And people can get this information right now just by streaming it and watching it after the fact. You get home from work tonight, whatever the deal. But I know that for me, I have a whole journal that I use just for your stuff. I have a Ramin journal. So I would recommend our viewers get themselves a Ramin journal, because that's where the value is. That's all I have to say. But we have some comments. So let's look at our comments that have come up.
okay.
Sylvia Somerville. Good morning, Sylvia, Niagara Falls, Ontario. I've noticed that since the debate with Trump and Harris, the Canadian dollar is rising against the US dollar. Does that mean we don't have to pay so much for an American dollar? Is that what that means,
Yeah.
Ramin?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, she's ahead of me, but I appreciate. So that kind of actually, let's lead on to that, because we will talk about what happens in in the situation that has happened now. And that's how we can manage if there was any type of crisis. So this is more of a policy situation. One of the reasons, Sylvia, that the Canadian dollar is stronger is because it's not more about the politics of things, the policies, but rather uh, tomorrow, for instance, we have our central bank, our Fed, is going to make a decision. And for the first time in almost 3 years now, 2.5 years, they're going to reduce the interest rates. So what happened so far, the dollar had been going up because United States had one of the higher rates, interest rates compared to other Western nations, as far as the big other big six. So the money goes where the best return is. So if the money can get 5% in the United States rather than 3% in Europe, what will come to the United States? So the money has been coming to the dollar. The dollar has become strong. But now that actually, if you have noticed that the rates in the United States have been going down for past few months. So what that means is the dollar is losing its attractiveness. And because of that, the dollar has been actually going down. So consequently, Canadian dollar, which is, we call it pairing, it's going up. So it's the weakness in the dollar which is pushing Canadian dollar. Now we look at Canadian dollar as a commodity dollar. So the price of oil and commodities help very much the Canadian dollar. But the oil itself has been soft in the last couple of months because of the fear of the global slowdown. So basically, what we have is the weakness of the dollar. I hope that helps, Sylvia.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the same thing has happened in euro, British pound, and now the Japanese central bank is Thursday. They're gonna, for the first time in 17 years, or second time in 17 years, they increased the rates. So they've never done that because they wanted to stimulate their economy. Economy has been in deflationary mode for a long time. So that's becoming a competition. So that's a great question. And we will talk more about this
Yeah.
because what do we do when there is a crisis? So before I do that, let me just expand the last crisis that we had is I'm reading
I'll
the
get back to that.
we get
She has
back to
another
that.
question. She has
Yeah.
another question. Sorry.
So we had, if you recall, the unfortunate thing happened. Never forget. It was over the weekend, October 7th. Hamas, the hostages, they moved into Israel. 1,250 people killed, hostages, over 200 hostages taken. That was huge, and that's what the markets really initially really overreacted. Within 2 or 3 weeks, you know, the markets were absorbing, is this going to expand? And one of the ways you can see, and that's one of the ways you can see how the markets are reacting, is in the Middle East, what is happening to the price of crude oil? If it's contained, that means there is going to be a local problem rather than global problem, because of course the world depends on obviously the Middle East oil. I mean, would Iran close the Hormuz Strait, or would there be escalation? So because it didn't happen, if you look at the charts, if you go back, you see, and we again, in the end of October, we were talking, I do a weekly market analysis. At that time, we were encouraging actually investing in Egypt market and start getting back in the markets. And since then, the markets have been in a big leg up because you could see it has been contained. So let's talk about the effects on other things and how we can protect ourselves when there are these crises, how other assets get affected. But just a tidbit from the locality. When there are tensions, you should look at the bank performances and how it affects them. In advanced economies, the banks get affected, their margins get affected by 0.1%. The biggest ones are emerging and developing markets. Their banking system react heavily. And also the banking system that they have a low capital ratio. That means they are not really protected. They get affected more during the tensions than the banks that they have a high capital ratio. They are pretty much well reserved in the sense of the risk management. let's talk about hedging, or protecting your assets. And I do have a table I use again with our students, and we call it risk on, risk off. When things are hunky dory, everything is good, then what you have to look at. We look at, well, how is the transportation doing? How is the Australian dollar is doing? How is the small and technology stocks are doing? How the financials are doing? That means the economy is good, the markets are bullish. But when there are things that there is a tension, you think the markets are not, there's they're concerned, then we look at, talking about currencies, we look at Japanese yen. We could look at the price of gold. What is happening to gold? Because gold is basically our insurance policy. That's where the money immediately goes to protect the value of the currency. And then it generally goes to fixed income like treasuries, especially government bonds, because they are more safe than other assets. And then the dollar could be either way. Sometimes the dollar is the safety zone. It used to be like we always thought about Swiss franc. Swiss franc is the place you want to have your, not as much now, but the dollar could be your safety zone. Or sometimes we look at crude oil, depending on the source of where the tension came from. So what I'm gonna do the next um, you know, a few things I'm gonna talk about. We talked about the markets dropping, but how about we looking at other assets? How did they react? So let's say we had, the Gulf War, right? We had the Gulf War, August 1990. The markets, S&P, United States market dropped 14.2%. The global markets dropped 9.6%. Guess what happened to gold? Gold was up 6.4%. What happened to the Treasury, 10-year Treasury, US Treasuries? They were up 1.9%. So now there is that balancing act, right? So it's about diversification. So in the case of tensions, you want to have a little bit of gold. You want to have a little bit of fixed income to absorb that tension, that fear. When we had the 9/11, when it happened in the United States, the whole global markets dropped almost 15%, 14.7% global. Gold actually went up 8.9% and continued after that going up. And the treasuries were up 4.1%. And when Iraq war in 2003 started, the markets in the United States dropped 10%, globally markets dropped 9, but gold was up 9.6%, and the 10-year treasuries were up 5.6%. So you can see there is a way out. So it's not like we have to basically really be focusing just on the stock market. We can protect ourselves. And as we concluded at the end of, if you're patient, you could if you can preserve, and you can absorb the losses. um, Other thing is, if you have like a mix of bonds and stocks, when we had again like a Gulf War, when the markets actually drop, if you had a mixture of um, these two assets, you would not have lost anything. You would be down maybe 0.5%. In average, the mixture, it's a safety zone. So it's good to have a diversified account. Um, Again, when we look back at a lot of different things, we see the commodities can be a good hedge. We can see how even oil and gold, when we look at all these crises, they can be part of your safety zone, and that's why it's good to have, again, to have as a hedge, be part of your portfolio. So, what you want to do, you want to look at with the Russian invasion, for instance, what happened? The price of food, fertilizers. We will, a lot of times we besides Canada, a lot of like South American countries, they imported fertilizers from Russia. Well, it almost tripled. So when you have a farmer has that cost, well, obviously the food goes up. So it's not just about the corn itself or soybean or wheat. It's about that. So what you could do in the times like that, it's a good thing to have a portion of your investments in the commodities, whether it's precious metals, energy, or maybe grains and food related. So um, the last, with the time running out, I will mention a couple of things. What happens to individuals and as the consumers? These events, they affect the consumer confidence. So what happens now? Our sentiment now, we are worried. The volatility goes up and down. Sometimes we become cautious. We don't want to be spent because we are concerned. What ifs? How about traveling? It affects the travel industry when there are crises. So you can
Mhm,
see there's a human side to it too, which affects our behavior.
mhm,
And in now being in the 21st century and everything with the internet and other things, what we see is the cyber risk, cyber attacks. It's not about killing someone, it's freezing something. And that's even bigger effect. So we have to really, we call them operational risk. So you can freeze actually a nation. And we've had experience in the United States. We've had in the Middle East, and we have so many brilliant, unfortunately, with the wrong directions, minds out there that can easily disrupt things. I just want to just we're using, we are online ritual here. Imagine you made the internet got disconnected or the power got disconnected. It's all so we have that risk and we have to really be careful. And that's why there has to be a lot of protection from that. So here's my conclusion of all the things we talked about. Believe it or not, at the end of the day, it's all about economy. It's economy. So these tensions happen. It's about the pocketbooks. It's how the actual in the United States, with everything going on, they are paying more attention. Do we have inflation? Do we have recession? Interest rates are going up. Interest rates are going down. Profit margins. So at the end of the day, we go through all these events, and what happens at the end is the economy, which dictates what direction the markets will react. Except, as I mentioned, the World War II was a huge, it was completely different things. And as we talked about, in the long run, actually, it saved a lot of nations. And I hate to use it that word, but economically, it revived because of the government spending. And it's a sad thing that we have to go through that to come with the solutions. But it created one of the biggest bull markets in 1950s, and but that's our little journey. I hope it was helpful.
Right.
And
Great.
let's
Yes.
maybe next time we talk about the policies, which is a
There
different.
we go.
Yeah.
No, that was great. And we do have some comments and we do have some time. So Mr. Gerard is here. Monsieur Gerard est ici. Uh, he says, Ramin, thank you very much for another informative presentation. You've answered his questions.
Oh, thank you.
And Sylvia has a question. When the USA and international markets rise and Canadian markets fall, is that a good time to invest in Canadian markets? What is your opinion? Thank you.
Okay. So uh, generally, actually, Canadian market is very much related to United States. So our biggest, the U.S. is the biggest partner for Canada. So they do really affect each other. So, but also Canadian markets are very much dependent on a lot of natural resources and commodities. But I have to say also, uh, they have very strong banking and financial services. So when we had like 2008 financial crisis happen in the United States, our friends to the north in Canada, they did not get really affected because there was only about 16 major banks with a very good capital ratios. good margins, reserves, that they did not get as affected like United States with thousands of banks that they have to be overlooked. So, but generally, you have to look at it in Canada more on the natural resource and the commodity sides. So, for instance, if the price of crude oil is going down, gold is gold is going down, and silver and uranium and copper and platinum. So all of those do affect. But generally, Sylvia, the Canadian market does follow United States. So when we have slowdown United States, obviously it does affect Canada's exporting. So we want to follow that. But if the market's globally going up, then it is might be, and Canada is down. We want to see what is the actual reason. But if that probably would be a good time actually looking at, it's not a single dimensional or single answer for that. We got to look at the whole picture, and that's why we look at like charts, to look at the history, how they have reacted. But generally, if the other markets are doing well, then Canada would follow. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Cool. Well, that's just great. So I think it would be important for us to mention, because maybe our viewers don't realize this about you and I, that last year, a year ago, perhaps, or a little more, I had 40 workshops in finance already established, which I've been delivering for years.
Mhm.
And they're more on the empowerment side, our relationship with money, our money conditioning and programming, et cetera, et cetera. So when I met you and I realized your background, I went, wow, here's a guy that knows all the other stuff that I don't know. So Ramin and I put our heads together and we came up with 100 workshops just in finance. So we meet on Tuesday nights and Thursday nights. And if anybody viewing would like to come in as a guest to check it out, because we have clients who purchased that product and we deliver that product every Tuesday evening at 7 o'clock Mountain Time. And on Thursday, so Tuesday night, I facilitate the soft side, the soft skills, the empowerment stuff. And then on Thursdays, Ramin facilitates the hard technical stuff. So we've been studying charts, learning how to read the charts, all the different things that he talks about on the show. We're actually students, so that ultimately at the end of the day, we can become our own best portfolio manager. That's what I'm planning on doing anyway. So just to put that out there, we don't talk about it very much on the show, but I think it's timely to do that today, because as you can see, there's a wealth of information here. And I think between the two of us, we had like about, between you and I, we have about 80 years of experience in our fields of endeavor. And so our program is called 100 Shades of Prosperity. And I think it's important because the average bear doesn't think that they maybe even deserve to know how to trade or how to read the charts or how to do what you do. But now your goal and your ambition is to mentor others with all of the experience and knowledge you have. And I've created over 1,000 workshops. You have nearly 1,000 slideshows. I know it, and material. So I just want people to understand the value of what we offer every Tuesday. It's incredible. And I don't know any other two show hosts out there who could do that right now. I think we're like in a league of our own, just saying. I watch some financial analysts on television channels and I'm rolling my eyes and going, are they kidding? Now, you see, I get to have a sense of being able to listen to someone else and decide whether what they're saying has value or not. So thank you for that, Ramin. It's been an incredible journey. We're about halfway through our 100 workshops, but we're always open to taking on new clients, and you can step in and be financially educated. Could I have said it any better? I don't
No,
know. No.
that was
Okay.
awesome. Thank you.
All right. Well, we'll say goodbye for now, and we won't be hosting the press box today. Mr. Doug Smith is traveling in the United States, actually, and So he's on his way back, but he's not back yet. He had a speaking engagement down there this past weekend. And we're all very busy and we have other stuff going on. So we appreciate you watching the show. And the very biggest favor you could do for us is to share the show. Put the show on your Facebook page, put it on your Twitter, put it on LinkedIn, whatever social media you're using, just put it out there, because there could be one thing today that Ramin shared that somebody really needed to have that information. All right, so we're going to say goodbye for now, and we'll be back next week. Bye for now.